What's going on, creative family? It's Dustin, Valkema, and welcome back to another video. Today we're doing something a little bit different, and I'm really stepping out of my comfort zone here. And I'm going to show you guys what it is like for me, not only to be uncomfortable doing what I'm doing, but also working through a creative block. I got this image from Greg Wide. He hit me up on Facebook and it's like, dude, I got some images that I really want you to do something with. I just like your style and I want you to edit one of my photos. Okay, Greg, cool. Yeah, no problem, man. Just cash at me. It's cool. Then I sat there and I looked at these images and I thought I had an idea. It was gone after the first night, and then it was like a creative block. And I thought it's probably the perfect time to get on and work through an image from start to finish with you guys. And I've had a very big issue with like vulnerability. Like, I'm not scared to fail. I'm not scared of what people think, but I'm scared of like personally myself coming off sometimes like I don't know what I'm talking about. So you guys will get to see that in this video. It's going to be about a 4-hour process on an image that might normally take me an hour to do. I fail a little bit. I rumble and ramble, and see, this is what I'm talking about. I'm not a one-take guy yet, but we'll get there. Finished, not perfect. Let's get started. Here we are in Lightroom, and the first thing that I saw when I received this image from Greg was that I could do something with this cool hammer that he's got here. So in having Thor's hammer, of course, I'm going to think lightning and maybe a high energy image. And I really like how her hair is blowing in the wind here and really kind of gives a sense of movement. And so to prep this image, generally what I'll do is I'll take the shadows and I'll bring those up a bit. And I'll bring the whites down when I see that there are specular highlights on the subjects that I may or may not want to use once I get into Photoshop. So I'll bring the whites down just a little bit and increase the blacks. You can get away with cranking it quite high depending on what I see as being the final grade. And in this image, I really don't know what we're going to do yet, but I know that it should be cool by the time we're done. So this is typically how I start off. I may just drop the exposure here just a little bit because I know that I do want the image to be darker overall. And then bring the saturation down some. You can always saturate it again later, but I like to start off a little bit less saturated. Sometimes that helps just kind of visualize the overall mood that I'm going for. So working in the hue, saturation, and luminance, I'll pull the saturation of the blue down just a little bit so that the car isn't so vibrant. And as I said before, we can adjust that later on in Photoshop if we really need to. I'm hoping that at the end of the day, this vehicle won't be a primary part of the shot, but I really do like kind of having it there as he's not in a full cosplay or anything like that, so that we can have a little bit more fun with this image just being what it is. And I think that's pretty much it. I don't see that there's really any major chromatic aberration going on in the lights or the highlights or anything like that. So what I'll do is I'll just right click and say edit in Photoshop. And then that will open up Photoshop and we can get started with the preparation process for compositing. Now that we're in Photoshop, I generally like to do some kind of a paint over, especially for commissioned images where I may not have all of the time to spend just tweaking and playing around creatively. And what I'll do is just create a new layer. I'll grab the brush tool, make sure that I've got a hard brush that usually works out fairly well, and we can just use this current color. Really any color works. Right now we're just kind of mocking it up. And I just typically like to paint anything rough into the scene that I see can be used. So that'll be lightning. We'll maybe have some lightning going on down his arm a little bit. We will want some kind of highlights that are happening in the glasses here. And what I'll typically do is, I mean, this is like an elementary trick here, is just draw a quick little light source so that I know exactly where I want that light to come from and where I want that to be. And so I'll just draw kind of the cone here from a primary light source, because this is what will primarily be getting hit from that light, from the lightning and effects that we put in later on. I think that works pretty well. I do know that I want this here to be the primary focus of the photo. So anything that's kind of out here on these outer edges are really going to need to be either dropped in exposure, toned down quite a bit, things like that, so that we can really make this the focus area. And so I think what we can do here is just work with some nice atmosphere, smoke, anything like that, just to kind of dirty up this scene a little bit on the edges so that you don't see too much of that happening. And that would also go for any of this stuff here in the background. We'll also want to have like a really nice, maybe push the atmospheric perspective a little bit more, just to bring that focus point a little bit more shallow into the scene. So from here, I think for this image, I'll work a little bit different and not build the atmosphere up right away. I think that because this image is a little bit different for me, is in I didn't know initially what my overall concept was to start, aside of having just cool lightning and effects like that happening. I think that it might be a little bit more of a fun process to kind of work a little bit backwards and do some of these effects and things like that first, and then we can build our scene around that next. So what we'll do is we can just hide I'll name this paint over. Not that I think we'll need it, just because the overall concept of the lightning effects and things is fairly simple. Screw it, we'll just delete that. We won't need it. I will just Control or Command J to duplicate this background layer, just so that we can always go back to this if we need it and work a little bit more in a non-destructive manner. And so what I'll do here is just grab an adjustment layer, curves, and we'll pull those curves up here a ways, just to where you can see their faces start to get blown out in white. And then I will just Command or Control I to invert that layer mask there, so that we can just paint with a white brush on the layer mask. And I will just use a soft brush, set my opacity to 30% with my pen pressure sensitivity on, and we will have a white brush. And so essentially what we're doing here is just an overall, like a macro dodge and burn to cover larger amounts and really accentuate that light direction that we'll be getting from them, or that we'll be getting from our lightning effects that we'll initially have on the hammer there. And so what I'll start doing is just really painting kind of on their face. And because this light direction works quite well from what was originally in the photo, we can kind of get away with not having to create a new light source. And sometimes you actually have to go a little bit more harsh with and more precise with how you're painting this. And it doesn't all have to be perfect. We can kind of just play with this here. And what I'll be doing is just pressing X, and that will toggle my foreground and background colors from white to black, so I can add or subtract to that mask. So I don't think we actually need so much there on his chin. We're just trying to make this pop just a little bit. I think what we'll really need to do is make sure that we can get a nice light effect happening on his glasses here. I think that'll help sell it in the overall image. And so we'll just accentuate some of these natural highlights that are already happening on the glasses. And then we'll do the same thing with her face. Just a little bit more kind of in the area that we drew the cone earlier. So that should cover her whole face. And so we'll just paint a little bit more light here to help accentuate that light direction. All right, sorry about that. Sun came in, life of a parent. Where were we? All right, so continuing on, painting some of this extra light in here. What we'll do is, right now we're just trying to get somewhat of a decent base to this and making sure that we have some of these areas painted so that that light direction gets accentuated a little bit. We can do a little bit more of like the contouring, dodge and burn later when we end up retouching our subjects here. And so essentially what we're doing is we're really wanting to just kind of, hit some of these highlighted areas a little bit that will be getting hit by the cast light from the lightning once we get this in. So I think that's actually pretty good. This won't be too hot down here. All right, so that looks pretty good there for a base. Right. You can always alt-click your layer mask to get inside of that and kind of see what your painted areas look like. And what I do think we want to do is drop it a little bit on his face here so that it's not quite so crazy. And then with this being done, what I'll do next is start to build up the blue hues that we'll have from the lightning. And like I said, this is a little bit different from the normal process that I use. A lot of times I'll go back and I'll start off with the background effects and different parts of the atmosphere first, and then we'll build all of the lightning effects and special effects type stuff on top of that. But in this one, we're going a little bit different. Why not challenge ourselves? So what I'll do here to start the blue effects is I will just grab a solid color adjustment layer and we'll set that to a nice cool blue. The cool thing about using the adjustment layers like this is that you can always go back and adjust them later. So we'll invert the layer mask here and we'll set this to soft light as a blend mode. And then with a white brush, we can start painting on top of that. And so we'll see what that ends up looking like. We might need to, and let's see, bring this a little bit more to a saturated blue. And we'll try overlay. No, I think soft light will be good to start off. When I'm typically painting like cast light like this, I will often switch between different blend modes and even double up the effects sometimes. And so what we'll do with this one here is we're actually going to paint kind of heavily on all of these areas. And this is why it's nice that the sun's actually working for us in a sense, that we're already getting all of the highlights and shadows that we need from that area. And so this might actually completely implode on us later, but I like to live on the edge. So we'll see if this works. So the process for this that I want to use or want to try using here is just using the blend if and the layer style here, or in the blending options, and see if we can actually make this just hit the highlighted parts of the face. So, and yeah, just so that we don't have to deal with any of the extra just hand painting and things like that. And so I'm painting over the body here. I do know that the values of the sky and the hand do get a little bit close here at certain points. And so we'll see if we can pull that. And we may end up having to just select parts of the sky and then pull that out later on. All right, so with that painted, we will just double click this layer and then move down into this blend if section here. And we'll say blend if gray, that's fine. But what we'll want to do is not use this layer. This is specifically talking about the adjustment layer here, and we won't really have any effect if we start to pull, you know, any of this up, because it's just affecting that the blue parts, you know, that are in the image. So that's not really going to give us the effect that we want. And what we really want is to work on the lower image and really start to pull those values in a way that we can almost create a masking effect based off of the luminance values in the face. And so what we'll do is we'll bring this until we start to see it come out of the sky just a little bit there. And then if you Alt and then click and drag, you can actually feather this effect here a bit just by sliding these, placing these sliders around here. And so I think this actually works quite well for us. If we click OK, you can toggle that effect on and off, and you can see how that blue cast light is quite strong right now. We'll adjust it later on. But you can see that it's affecting primarily just the highlights, and it has a nice fall off. But what we will want to do is maybe see if we can create a mask just around this top part of our subjects. So I will turn off both of these correction layers here. And let's see if we can pull that. If we go to channels, I always like to check channels first and see what we can pull out of here. With the wand tool, we'll take our tolerance to maybe 10 and try that out. It's on point sample. We'll do a 3x3 average just to sample a little bit larger of a spot. I still think that's actually going to grab quite a bit of what we don't want. So we can move back into our layers panel and let's go select RGB. There we go. So we'll move back into the layers panel and we'll just press select subject and see what that gives us. And that's actually not horrible. I really don't like to spend too much time on creating these initial masks. So as I was showing in a previous tutorial, I'll just enter quick mask by pressing Q. And then we just use our brush tool on white or black to add or subtract from this mask. So black is going to be painting the darker areas here. Make our opacity 100%. So black will be adding to the red and then white will be taking away. So anything that's white will actually be selected in the photo, and we can just paint around and kind of fix up some of these areas to see if we can pull a little bit better of a mask without having to do too much work. All right, so that's going to take too long. I don't really feel like dealing with that. Let's try we'll get out of that, press Q again to get into our selection. We'll press D to deselect, or Control or Command D to deselect. And let's try going up to filter. We'll just say color range. See how this works out for us here. So the nice part about color range is that you can just kind of click around your image and start pulling different things out, which I think that this will work. That this will work very well overall. And that gives us a little bit different of a mask than we would have had just doing the channels like we were before. So I'm actually really liking this. I'll kind of move that up just a little bit to try to create some separation. We'll click OK, and then what we can do is go into our channels here and we can click the little, what looks like a layer mask icon, and that's going to just create a new alpha from the selection that we had. So then from here, what we can do is actually just dodge and burn like we had talked about as well in the hair masking tutorials. And we can grab that dodge and burn these shadows. And then we can use a black brush to kind of fill in the extra here. So typically I wouldn't even worry about masking out or selecting the hammer here, but because the selection was actually fairly decent, why not have a mask for that if we really wanted to adjust that later on, we could do that. So just go ahead and select that guy. It doesn't have to be perfect. We can always adjust these masks later on. And we'll just paint through them to make sure that we have everything on the inside here is black for our subjects. And like I said before, we don't need to make this 100% perfect. We just want it as close to a decent selection as possible. And so we'll just paint everything black on the inside to get that close, and then we will try to dodge the outside of them to see if we can just make that mask a thing so that it has some kind of nice contrast between the background and foreground. All right, so with the dodge tool, we will just go to midtones. Exposure is fine, and see if we can paint these midtones out. I don't need to go all the way down because I'm not concerned with the bottom of them. Just more of these areas in between that are much closer to a neutral gray from the backdrop here. Not worried with our hair. Since we're not replacing the background, it's not completely necessary to have the hair masked out, because eventually we'll just be adding to that anyways. If we need any more variation in the hair, we'll just paint that in. So I'll grab the highlights, not the shadows. We'll grab the highlights with the dodge tool, and then we will just dodge all of this to create a much harder mask there. And then what we'll do here at the end of this is create a garbage mask that just kind of cleans everything up on the outside of them. So we'll grab our brush and we'll fix a couple little pieces in here that we missed. I think some of this was actually picked up by the dodge tool, which is fine. And we'll grab our lasso tool and we'll just create a garbage mask around the outside of them. And everything on the outside of this we want to be white. So we will Control or Command Shift I to invert that selection, and then we'll just press delete. And that will turn everything white. So now we have an inverted mask. So if we were to use this for a layer mask right now, everything except for them would be visible. And so we'll just Control or Command I to invert that mask. And then we have a pretty nice selection of just the two of them in here. And so we can now use that mask, and we'll just call it subjects. And now this alpha channel we can use for anything that we need to work with them. So what we can do here is actually go through and select, just Control or Command click the subject's thumbnail there in the channels, and then we can invert that, Control or Command Shift I, set everything to black. So we will just press X to switch our foreground and background colors, and then delete. Let's make sure that that worked here. Press delete. And so now if we look inside of this layer mask and alt click it, you can see that there is a hard cutout now where that all sat. All right, so now that we have that mask created, we've got something that we can use to mask off certain effects. We have this cast light layer here, so we can just call that cast light, and we will just hide that for now because we don't really need it at this moment. And I do have some brushes that are just standard lightning brushes. I believe I got these from DeviantArt, and I will just create a new layer. I'll just name this Lightning. And with our brush tool, we can grab maybe something closer to an almost white, very low saturation blue, and we can select any of these. Where are they? There they are. You can select any of these lightning brushes. So if you right click on your brushes, we could always just paint here and then Control or Command T to transform that, and then you can transform everything there. But if we undo that, and if we right click on the brushes, you'll see that you have this little circular thumbnail here. And what that does is with these two control handles, you can actually squash your brush down quite a ways. And you see what's happening there. If you leave it on, I guess, just a full circle, it'll basically have your brush just standard how it is. And if you squash that down a ways, you can see that it creates this really cool, effect of where it just squashes that brush down. And so what we'll do here is, if we can grab it, there we go, is we'll just leave it at its normal. Actually, we'll squash that just a little bit. Maybe focus the directionality on that just a tad. And then this little arrow handle here, or just randomly clicking on the outside of that circle, will allow you to rotate it. And so you'll see here how you can actually rotate those brushes. So what we'll do is we will just click a couple times to create the initial lightning strike, just to kind of see what that looks like there. And I don't use my eraser much, but we'll use it now. And I'm just going to erase a little bit here off these edges so that we don't have so much of that lightning effect spilling out everywhere else. So what I would like to use, actually, let me open Bridge here a second. All right, sorry, my mic cut out there for a minute. So what I did is I'm just pulling in a different effect here to kind of place a little bit more emphasis on this lightning. And we can just sort of match up the direction of that with the transform. And I have that set to a screen blend mode there. And then what I will do is actually use this with a puppet warp, which will, the puppet warp is a pretty cool tool to be able to really contort your images or your effects and really reposition those in the way that you want. I use this a lot for repositioning parts of the body if I need to, or different elements like this that we might want kind of an added effect. And so with the puppet warp, you can create pins just by clicking here. And then if you essentially that's really more of like an anchor, I should say, than a pin. That's basically going to hold that one area still and then allow everything else to kind of rotate around that. And we'll see that here in a second. So if I add another pin here to sort of break that up, and then you can sort of see how this is working. It's doing its best to kind of keep those areas sort of stationary. And what this really does is it gives you a lot of control over the specific warps that you do. I do like the transforming warp tool, or the what is it? Warp transform, and that can give you a lot of cool effects. But I really like the control that this gives you, and exactly the positioning that you're going to get from your effects. So we will just warp this around a little bit to somewhat mimic the direction of this lighting here, while still adding some variation to it. So once you've got those there, you just press OK. And now if we turn, the nice part about working with a smart object is that we can always go back and adjust this later by double clicking the smart filter here. But if we just turn this effect off and on, you can see the way that we were able to warp that effect so that it worked out quite nicely. So what I think we'll do is we'll actually grab this cast light layer and move in a ways. And I believe that most of this hammer is actually going to be blue anyways. So we will just paint this. Let's grab a soft brush. And we'll just paint this hammer blue. Won't worry too much because we'll have some glow to that anyways. We can kind of just give a little bit of an effect there. But how about the curves? Let's actually do that. So we'll grab the curves here. That was just a, we'll call it dodge. Just call it dodge curves. And so that curves layer will actually give us a lot more of a bright image because we're essentially just bringing up the exposure there. And so we can just work our way right around the hammer here where that lightning is going to be striking, and just painting with a white brush to make sure that we're getting some of those extra effects. So same thing with his hands here. Don't want to go too crazy. And so we'll just paint that there as well. Let's see how that works out for us. Yeah, so that works out quite well. And so from this point here, we really don't have any atmosphere going on. Let me actually bring all of these right into, there we go. All right, so we'll bring all of these right into the lightning group. And I'm thinking that at this point, what I can do is just grab a gradient. So we'll just go to gradient adjustment layer, put that at a 180-degree angle. We can switch that to reflected and then reverse that. And black and white gradient will work just fine. So essentially what we're doing here is we're just going to quickly darken up the scene on the outsides there. So we can actually just make this a black gradient. Opacity to 100. Click OK and OK. And then what I think that we can really do here to help sell this is use certain atmospheric elements. And so I will just go to my smoked out pack and see if we can find a few different smoke elements that would look pretty good, just to kind of darken and muddy up the scene just a bit. And I'm really looking for anything that will really just help give us some nice breakup and hopefully place even a little bit more emphasis right in the front of the scene there. So I actually like this one here. We can pull that one right in. See how this will work for us overall here. So if we take that guy and we just bring that back a little bit. Now I'm just dropping the opacity to see where we might be able to work with this a little bit easier. And I think we might actually just be able to do that some more with a layer mask. And I'll turn on the lightning layer just so that I can see the way that that's affecting the lightning as well. And we will create a layer mask. If you alt or option click the layer mask button, it will just invert that mask from the get-go, so you don't need to invert it later. But I think what we'll do is we'll actually just work with a regular layer mask. And black brush to be a little bit more subtractive with it. And we'll just paint right around our subjects there. Cool part is that we can really get around them. So just going to use just that soft brush there to really pull that in. And we'll want to do the hammer as well. So why don't we actually grab the alpha that we had previously created, and now we can just go ahead and paint right around them so that they will pop out almost completely. And we will Command or Control Shift I to invert that, change to a white brush, and then this way we can actually paint anything else out in the background that we may want to have hidden. So we can start here. We will have to clean that up a bit. But you can see how that just really immediately gives us a whole lot of atmosphere, and we're really not getting too much of the background right now. And sorry in advance, because I know that I'm trying to get used to talking and working at the same time. It's not something that I'm used to doing at this point, but I need to get there. So you guys are getting just the raw, kind of crazy, choppy thought process, but hopefully this gives some kind of value to somebody that's watching. So with this here, we'll actually continue with a black brush, and we'll see if we can pull out any of these foreground elements a little bit better. And what I do have is I have a brush that I created here. We'll actually be covering how I created these brushes here in a different tutorial. I need to start hiding these or closing these groups a little bit more often. But we will use the bruises and soft swab brush on black, and what that's going to do is it's essentially like a smoke brush, but it's just a little bit more soft, and so it gives a nice effect to it there. If you change the opacity, that's just essentially going to bring some of this stuff out here in the foreground without getting too crazy. And initially, this is actually what I had kind of seen anyways when I was looking at the image, because what I didn't want to do is have to deal so much with the background and, you know, maybe putting a cityscape or spaceships, anything crazy like that in the background. So sometimes like this, and just an image that you want to look cool, it's really easy just to hide it from the get-go and you don't have to worry about it again. So what we'll do is keep painting using just pressing X here to add and subtract. I'm trying my best to stay away from showing that sky really at all. I don't think we need it, and I think we can get away with something a little bit more atmospheric. what we might actually be able to do if we head back into Bridge here and go to Compositing Assets, and let's see here. We have dramatic skies somewhere. I might actually have some here in, if we go to clouds. Yeah, there we go. See if we can pull one of these. I'm not sure what might look the best. Let's try this guy. We'll just pull one of these in here and see if we can steal from that just a little bit. Flip that horizontal. And then what we can do is kind of the same process actually to hide that, since we don't want that to be in the scene as a prevalent background, but we may just be able to soft light it. Overlay, soft light, overlay. Let's do overlay, and we'll create a layer mask with this and just use this black brush now, the smoke brush, to kind of clear out around that. Go to 100% and see if this will help us at all. But this will give us a sense of having a sky in the scene, but it won't give us too much detail that it's actually maybe taking away from parts of the image here. And so we'll see if we can open that up that way. I do like how it's just adding just a bit of blue color. We'll be adding that a little bit later on, so I'll right click, grab a soft brush, and then just paint along this bottom edge so that it's a little bit less harsh. And then really paint some more right around the edges. And so what that does is it gives us a little bit more of a dramatic enhancement to the smoke that we already have currently placed in the scene. And to emphasize where some of this lightning effect may be coming from anyways, we can go ahead and just grab, let's see, we could do that with a gradient. I really like to work non-destructively. I'm not really a fan of just using the brush tool if I can get away with it. When I say the brush tool, I mean the brush tool on a new layer. Sometimes it's really easy to get caught up in a destructive workflow, and then it's downhill from there, or uphill from there if you need to actually go back and make any adjustments later on. So with that here, we'll set, let's see what we want to set this blend mode as. I like what color dodge is doing, but I don't like how it's blowing everything out. And so what we'll do is we'll set that to overlay as well. And then on the layer mask, we can go back and grab our handy smoke brush, our bruises and fogs brush, and we can actually paint right around that now. And what that will do is it will just give us a little bit more of a kind of natural breakup to the way that we have that initial smoke layer happening. So I think that that'll work. So what I do see that we need to do initially, right from the get-go, is that we have a little bit of a mask here, but we do need to make a light source pop here on the ground as well. So we know that the light's coming fairly harsh. I mean, anything lightning would be casting enough light to hit the ground. So we'll want to make sure that we hit that pretty well. And I'll leave this shadow. I don't like the way that this shadow is working because it's obviously going against the light direction that we're currently trying to push. That's coming a little bit more from camera left because the sun's that way, creating a long cast shadow there. And so we'll want to fix that too. I'm just going to go into the layer mask, and you can see here for that initial atmosphere layer, you can see what's happening in that it's creating this hard line from the alpha where we just did a quick cutout. And so I will just grab, we'll say just the white brush, and we'll just see if we can go and paint that white brush around this area to break that up. Just kind of hide some of that. So what that's going to do, yeah, just like I thought. And so that's going to bring all of that effect in quite heavily, but we can follow up with a black brush now and just kind of diminish that a little bit more naturally. And I do actually like that effect where it was, you know, kind of just subtle, coming over them quite subtly. See if we can bring it up and hide some of these shadowed areas as well. I know that we won't need those later on, so it doesn't really concern me to get rid of them. And since we did it to the one side, we'll maybe go through the other side here with the car. Kind of tone that back quite a bit. And drop the opacity to 60%. Holy cow. Okay, drop the opacity. There we go. So what we'll do here at this point, just to get rid of some of this stuff on the ground that I know we won't want, is just create a smart object from this background layer. So we'll right click and go convert to smart object. And then we'll double click the thumbnail once that's created. So that will open up in a separate PSB layer. And so that we can just work here inside of this layer and then save that, and then it's automatically updated in our main comp. And so what I'd like to do is see if we can just use the patch tool. So that's J or Shift J to get to it. The patch tool is this kind of square like hash looking icon. Looks like a patch, not a hatch. I don't know why I said hatch. And we'll just drag that over to where we're, I think, the best place. Yeah, we want to make sure that we line up these tire marks there. And then if we let go of that, you'll see that it is really just giving a nice fill to it. And what I actually do want, no, that actually works. Disregard that. I'm not really too concerned about it because we do have other options. So what I was going to say is that a lot of times what I really like to do more often, which is the reason why I actually came into the smart object, is that I will create a new layer. The patch tool actually works quite well to where we would just have a few minor things to paint out. But what I like to do most often to start off is just to use the clone stamp tool, and that's primarily when the patch tool doesn't work so well. But I will grab and make sure that with this clone stamp tool, my sample is set to current layer and below, and I'm on a new layer so that I can just select certain areas like this and we can just paint right over that. And generally what you want to do is just match everything up as best you can so that when you have lines like this with tire tread or anything of that sort, you can just match those up so that what you're not having happen is you're not dealing with, say, two pieces of tire tread now that look completely off. So we'll just sample right around them and we'll paint. I generally do this with quite a hard brush. You don't want the brush to be so soft that you start to see feathered edges where there shouldn't be, or say soft rocks where there shouldn't be. So we'll just get right up in here and remove any of those shadows to begin with. And so you can see here that we just remove the shadow. I'm not going to worry about the shadow of the car. I'm hoping that that's something that we can just hide here in a little bit. And now I'm just looking for anything else that might be distracting. I don't think that the tire tracks are even really going to be a problem. So with this layer here, I'll just press Controller Command S to save this PSB. Once that's done saving, it'll automatically update in our main comp. And the cool thing about doing it this way is that it actually helps out with your file sizes as well, instead of having to continuously create new layers and update. What this does is it really just gives you a nice single image or single file, and then all of our other adjustments that are within that smart object are just nested. All right, moving right along here. Now I'm looking at the image, and I think that actually we have a hard line here, and I think that's actually just coming from one of two things. It's either the sky overlay, or it's coming from our overlay for the lightning / energy effect, which it looks like it is. So we can just grab that now and just create a layer mask, select a round brush, soft round on black, not clone stamp tool or brush tool. Set the opacity to 100, and we can just paint right around there. And what I'll do actually is just make sure that we paint on these outside edges here. It's something that I typically like to do right away, just in case there is any spill or anything like that happens from the overlay that's affecting the main image. And now looking at this here, I think what we can do is start to bring in a little bit more emphasis to them and really make the color effects kind of happen. So what we'll do is we'll enable this blue layer here that we created before, and we can see what that's doing here immediately. So what I'll do on this layer mask here is actually just start to paint out certain areas. So if you don't know about the zooming process here, or it's really more, say, scrubby zoom. So if you hold Controller Command and the space bar, you can just click and drag. And then if you Alt and then right click and drag, you can adjust the size of your brush by dragging horizontal. And then if you drag vertically, you're going to adjust the hardness of your brush. And so you'll see this red overlay that's happening all the time, and that's just me using my tablet, my Wacom pen, to make those adjustments. It really helps because pressing the left and right bracket keys can also adjust your brush size, but I find that it's a lot easier and just a bit more fluid of a workflow to do that with my pen that I'm already obviously using. And so what we're doing is we're just going to paint some of these effects here off of the areas of the hand. Now that we have a little bit more atmosphere and stuff into the scene, we can really start to paint what we want where, and kind of know where that's actually going to be hitting our subjects. So what I think we actually need to do is go back into the blend if, and I want to pull that out even more here. And this is something that we can actually do when we get to the grading process, is kind of make the overall image quite a bit more blue, and I'm not really too worried about the skin tones right now. This is just primarily something to help affect the color of the highlights. And so I'll just take the opacity down a little bit. I don't want it to be too bad, almost like there's just a soft, cool gel that's coming from that area. And I may just actually take that. Now let's see where. I'm just going to alt click these layer masks to see what's being affected. So I'm actually going to pull this off of his face just a little bit, so that we can get a little bit more maybe of these midtones showing through as skin colors and not so much blue. Because I really don't like how there's not a whole lot of like a tonal or a value difference here in his cheek. So we'll just paint around that a little bit. And I'll go through here, and also, like I said before, I'll go through and I'll dodge and burn a little bit. I don't think that there's a whole lot of real like skin retouching or smoothing or anything like that really needs to happen. It might happen on a much smaller scale a little bit later on, but for right now, that's actually okay. So I'm just kind of browsing the scene here. Let's add some type of a light effect or something here to the ground. And what we can do for that, and this will be a little bit destructive, but I think it'll be fine. We will just group, let's see here. I would just make a layer or unlock that base layer. Press Control or Command G to group these two layers together, and we'll just say, call it background, so BG. And then what we can do here is create a gradient adjustment layer. It's actually a pretty cool effect. All the smoke. We'll make that radial. Let's go. All right, sorry about that. That was kid number 2 popping in. I'm sure that child number 3 will be popping in at any time now to say goodnight. So let's go in and we'll tweak this this gradient adjustment layer here, and we'll make it a little bit smaller, because what I don't want to have is this spill happening. And typically you can actually do this with a brush quite often, but like I said before, I really try to work a little bit non-destructive if possible. So I'm going to create a gradient and then create a smart object out of that gradient to see if that'll actually help us here with anything. So with this gradient, we're just doing a radial gradient with the opacity here on the outside is going to be set to 0. So with the gradients, these top sliders, or the top handles, are what control the opacity. And so if you have your opacity for that set to 0, it's obviously going to be 100% transparent. And then you can crunch, the scale of that transparency down to however you need. Now, a lot of times you'll actually see that there are 2 different sliders here on the bottom. So with these handles, the one on the left is currently what is my 100% opacity, and the left is on the left is 100% opacity, on the right side is 0 opacity, but there is actually a color attached to that. So if I go into this and I make, say, red, you'll see that there's still a color fall off that goes off to 0. So this is actually really cool for a lot of different effects. For this one, primarily, what I think we'll do is we'll actually make this a little bit darker of a blue, so that on the left side we have a bright kind of sky blue, and then it fades off to darker blue as that light would diminish on the ground. So from here, we'll just click OK. We'll click OK. And we can go to, we'll say maybe soft light to start, and we'll work our way from there. So what we can do here is just right click and go to convert to smart object. So with this smart object in place now, we'll bring this back down into our background group and then press Control or Command T to transform that smart object. And if you hold the Shift button, now they've adjusted the way that the transform works here. So if you don't hold anything, it transforms uniformly, and now you need to hold Shift to actually be able to skew this and warp it as you'd like. So that's interesting. I think that it's actually a pretty good move for Adobe to do it that way. But it was really a pain in the ass to figure that out early on, or just get used to it. I really like the workflow with that now. It caused all kinds of headaches. And so let's see, soft light. What we're trying to do here is create some kind of a cast light on the ground from, what would currently be going on in the scene. So I'm trying to see here what might be the best option, and that may just be using overlay, and then Control or Command J will duplicate that layer, and you can see that it's creating the light on the ground. And so if we group those and we just call that ground effects, now we can just Control or Command click and move that light source wherever we'd like it. So what we'll do is we'll create one on the ground here, press Control or Command T, and then we can scale that up a little bit. And I see that it's actually getting really weird here in the center. So we'll make sure that we pull that out of there a ways. I think that the skin tones in the original image, what I did here just to show that background image is I just alt click. If you alt or option and then click the little eyeball, it'll essentially just solo that layer. And what I'm looking for here is just to make sure that, which in this case isn't going to work, I don't think, too well for us, but basically make sure that the skin tones here and the ground aren't the same value. And what I use that for is just if I'm looking into doing like a blend if type operation on it, which might actually work. We'll try it, but just thinking of things in grayscale, because the blend if handles work in grayscale, I can look at the two different values here and see if it would even be worth trying to use a blend if to, say, mask out just the ground here versus the skin. And I could go through and do like a selective, I could do, what is that, color range? Yep, so select, I could do a color range and then, select all of the skin tones and then mask that out and then work different things. But I think for us here, just for the sake of speed, what we'll do is just create a new layer mask on that group, and then we can just paint out where their feet are. But I do want to possibly remove some of these light effects. Yeah, so we'll just have to delete one of those layers, and we'll say go from overlay to a soft light, which should help us out a bit from it getting way too blown out. Let's try the bottom one on soft. Yeah, see, soft light just makes it look completely funky. So overlay is fine. So we'll grab that layer mask, and we're going to just grab a regular soft round brush, make that black, and bring the hardness up just a little bit. And we'll see, actually we're in the pencil tool, so we'll press Shift B to get back to our brush tool. And with that black brush, now we'll just paint kind of right outside of their skin tones here. Let's see if that helps us at all. Because what we're looking to do is primarily take care of the ground area to bring some kind of like a color emphasis there, make it feel like the light's really getting cast from that lightning on its way down. And this might actually even be too harsh. We really don't need a lot. So I'll drop my opacity on that layer just a little bit. And then we can paint a little bit back in here towards the bottom. See if that works. We might be able to just change that later on and not really mess with it too far. All right, so we're moving all over the place here, actually. I kind of got off track. I do that a lot, actually, when I'm working. I get into kind of the creative process, and I happen to, to jump from point A to point B, and I do things differently than I did in the last photo, and there's 101 different ways to go about stuff. So it's really just more or less figuring out what works best for your photo. And especially in a photo like this that I would say I don't have just a set process for. Like if I'm doing, cosplay stuff, I say, hey, I know that I'm going to start off on retouching my subject, and then I'll move into masking and then background swaps and removal, things like that. And this one we're just doing quite a bit differently than normal, which I think is fine. It's always good to change it up here a little bit. Let's see. So what I think I want to do is maybe emphasize them just a little bit more and bring a little bit more of a focus right to where their head is. And I think how we can do that is if we go into this lightning layer and we create a gradient, we'll say a radial gradient, scale that down just a little bit. Let's say maybe something like that. And you place it right behind their head. That should be okay. So if we click OK on that and we change that mode to overlay, you can see now how that really kind of brings a little bit more emphasis right to their location. But instead of having that light them as a whole, what we're going to do is go back and grab our mask here, our subject's alpha, and we'll just right click and delete layer mask and then create a new layer mask. Actually, I wanted to invert that, so Control or Command Shift and I. No, Control or Command I. That's not a selection. And so with inverting that, now we just have that right behind our subjects. And you can see how that works there and just gives them a little bit of a nice pop. And we can go through here now and essentially move that light source to wherever we really want it. And it will still be doing the same thing, just kind of giving us a little bit more emphasis and a pop right behind them. Let's go ahead and try to make that a little bit bigger and see what happens. So I think it actually works bigger. And now we do have this issue here to where it's showing out from under that mask. So we'll just grab that layer mask and use a black brush. We'll say full softness or 0% hardness. We can just paint that out of their body space there so that that's not getting affected anymore. All right, so at this point, what I really want to focus on is getting more effects into this scene without affecting my subjects in any way. And initially, when we started the video, I was thinking of, just adding, say, the lightning and, getting all of their cast light and things like that. But I think what might be pretty cool is to start building up maybe some smoke elements and really making some of the effects maybe from the sky lightning and things like that come in, and then we can actually work right on the subject truly last in, making sure that they pop. But what I think we'll want to do first is kind of get some of the effects in there so that we can see exactly how that's going to affect our setting. Let's move back into Bridge and go back to the smoked out kit. And I'm thinking for this one here, maybe we can start with a depth of field smoke. Go back into Photoshop, make sure that we're up front here, and we can create a new group. And that's with this little folder icon down here. So we'll just create a new group and we can call that, I would just call it effects. And that's what we'll use to build up the base of all of our smoke adjustments and everything from this point. And what I really like about this specific kit here is that there's a lot of depth of field elements as far as smoke's concerned. So it really can help add a lot of atmosphere or just some really cool autofocus effects. What I think that we'll do here is that first one, let's just grab that guy and we'll bring that in, and let's see if we can just transform this. What I'm looking for here is really to create, let's see here. I'm looking to create some really nice, like almost energy, like an energy stream kind of effect. And so what I'm doing in the free transform is I'm just holding controller command and then clicking one of these, transform points out on the edge there. And I'm just warping this smoke. So I'll click enter to apply that. We can go to, we'll say screen. Actually, color dodge kind of works all right. I don't use color dodge very often. It's one of those effects that or the layer styles that I typically don't have a whole lot of use for. But it's actually working quite well since we already have some of the brighter color elements behind it. So what we'll do here is we'll just rotate this around, and this will give us like a nice kind of energy particle stream. When your transform is up like this and you right click, you get access to all of the different types of transformation. So what I'll use for this one actually is warp. And then what warp does is that just allows you to click and drag any of your points, and you get these cool little Bezier curves right on the sides of your, on the sides of your transformation, which work really well for just letting you kind of go through and sculpt out the way that you want these effects to take place. And so in this instance here, I'm just looking to add a little bit more to, say, this particle stream. That would be, it's really more of an energy thing, I should say. It's not really even a full stream. It's just more energy coming down, from that effect there. Which color dodge might not work. There's a reason I don't use that. Screw it, we'll leave it. Color dodge is staying on for now. And so what I always do when I'm working with overlays, really of any kind, and I'm starting to warp them, is I look for these edges. I'm not sure if you can see this here. With these, you get these hard edges because maybe that background wasn't, completely 100% black, and it means that it's not going to be 100% transparent when you start to add like the light blend modes like screen and color dodge, add any of that. So I'll just grab the layer mask or create a layer mask on that and then just kind of paint that out. So at this point, we're just seeing what we can do to bring those effects up a little bit. And so I'll bring that smoke layer above the lightning. We may be able to just get rid of, we're just going to get rid of the initial lightning brush that we had there. And then see what we can do with a couple of these other overlays that I have. Go back into bridge. Let's see what we've got to work with here. What I'm really looking for at this point is something that will help kind of give the illusion. Maybe this one here I'll just use as an example. Something that'll give an illusion of energy that's, working off of his hand. So I'll flip this horizontal because I think that contour of the smoke there will actually work quite well. So if we set that to color dodge as well, I'm really more or less looking for something that will be able to come off of his arm there quite well. So we'll set that to screen for now and press enter to place that. And then we can press controller command M, and that'll bring up the curves. You can use controller command L. We'll use levels. So controller command L will bring up your levels adjustments. And especially when I'm working in smoke and I'm doing anything with effects like this, I'll just push those blacks in a little bit, which will take care of any of the outside issues for the most part. On certain smoke overlays and things like that, you may still have to go in and paint with a layer mask. But on an end, like I said it before, any of the screen, add, color dodge, blend modes, anything that's dealing more with light, you can just get away with crunching the blacks just a little bit, and that'll start getting rid of any of the unwanted parts of the image there. So what I'm looking to do is just see if I can pop this just a little bit more, because I really do like what color dodge was actually doing. But what I don't like is when you hit these areas like this here that are hitting 100% white. But maybe I care a little bit too much about that. And this is something that I deal with often, that frustrates me even about myself, is I often get too nitpicky and too perfectionist, I guess, if you want to call it. It's really just an excuse for wasting time most of the time, that I'll zoom into, 450, 500%. I'm quite used to just needing to be that nitpicky for, what I do as a job, as a post-production artist in the industry. And so a lot of times I zoom in and I really don't need to. So maybe I just need to stop doing that so much. So what I'll do, instead of worrying too much about that, is I'll just erase that effect with a layer mask right off there. And I really do like, this is kind of the effect that I was looking to go for in the beginning anyways, which is just having, these nice kind of random, almost fractal, looking bits of energy that would be coming from the energy that's hitting Mjolnir here, hitting the hammer, and then transferring down onto his arm. What I can actually do at this point, I do know that I have maybe a couple cool brushes here. Brushes are something that I wish that I used a lot more. And I don't know why I got out of using them. I think the more that I got into shooting and creating my own overlays, or buying certain overlays and doing things like that, I get into using a lot more overlays and then tweaking those rather than using brushes. But I do have a couple brushes. Where are those here? You can use any of these. I was just testing out a few different brush concepts the other day that I think might work for this. So we'll set some of these to screen. See if we can set those small, and then just do little bits of painting here and there. What I think we can do is maybe set that to color dodge as well, and then make this brush quite blue. Let's see if that helps. No, it's really dodging all of the colors that we have there. So yeah, let's go to overlay. I think overlay can be fine because that'll work pretty well as a base. So I don't like the way that brush is actually reacting. So instead of wasting time with that, I don't feel like creating any brushes here at the moment. Let's see if we can just use one that I actually have. And I believe it's in Lightning. Let's see here. No, those are the other ones. Energy brushes. Yep, that is exactly what I'm looking for. So these energy brushes here, sparklestock.com, you can see the name there. These are some of the brushes that I actually used for the Captain Marvel series that I have the speed edits posted here. And they're actually really nice brushes that work quite well in many scenarios. So I will just alt click one of these brighter colors here from the effects that we have going on up top. And then we can just paint that in. See if we go there, set our brush to 100%. Yeah, and I think that should give us exactly what we want. So I'm actually switching to my mouse. Sometimes I find because of my tablet settings, it's a lot easier just to grab my mouse and to do certain things once in a while rather than screw around with my sensitivity settings on my tablet here. So now we'll just kind of, I guess, scroll through and see what we can do with some of these layers here, or these blend modes. I'm really just looking at the color to see how that color is getting affected. So we'll just stick with screen. We can run that for now, and then we can do some color paint overs here in a moment. So what I'll do is I'll actually go right back to the warp tool. So I'll press Control or Command T, and then right click, go into warp. You can also do that by going into edit, and then you go into transform, and then you have all of these options here, which are the same options you get from right clicking. So it's kind of a good little productivity tip. So I think what I can do here is, if I have this effect coming off of his hand here and then working around his arm and then working its way back under his arm, so it would, we'll see here, and I'll show you how to kind of make this look like it's going around him. So what I'll do is I will just create a new layer mask for that and grab a soft round brush. And then with black as the foreground, what we'll do is we'll just paint this effect out on this part of his skin here. And when I'm doing this, especially with light effects, what I do like to do is leave just a little bit on the edge here. And that's just really so that you can almost have like a little bit of a wrap light effect, to where you see that going right around his arm, but it's not so prominent that it's causing issues, to where it looks like it's just cut and paste there, but now you're at least getting the effect that it looks like it's wrapping. And so I'm just going to go around and start cleaning up some of these harder edges that were created from the brush there. And then what I will do is I'll press Control or Command L on the main layer here and see if we can push those whites to be a little bit brighter. And that should help us out some. And now what I can do is I'll do this next bit without actually creating a smart object out of that or anything, because if anything happened, we could actually go through and just create this effect again fairly easily. So I'm really not too concerned with it. We'll just press Control or Command U to bring up the hue saturation. and we'll click colorize to see if we can just add some color to this lightning here. And so if you have a white brush, you'll want to drop the lightness so that that color can actually shine through and kind of take effect. And then you can raise your saturation levels as needed from there. So we'll just stick with a nice cool blue like that. So it's doing pretty well at giving me what I want from that brush. But I do see a problem, and I think it's with this overlay here. And it is where when you're looking, from this distance a little bit further back, you start to get certain areas like this that really stick out now and they're a bright white. So I'll just paint that right out of the layer mask. Just to see if we can sort of keep the flow, of this energy kind of coming up and not destroying anything, visually as it goes down. All right, so what I really want to focus on right now is actually just some of these energy effects that we're wanting to put into the hammer here. There's something about it that I don't like, and I think that it's just we don't have quite enough breakup. Maybe of the effect, like it's just a single lightning bolt coming out of nowhere. And so I think what we can do here is we'll go back into our depth of field smoke, see if we can find something that's going to give us some really cool. I'm thinking something maybe like this here that would actually, affect a little bit more of just the sky. And, right up in this area here that we can use to really push up some of those colors and give a little bit more of an energy appeal, like it's actually coming from above rather than just a random stream of energy. We'll just go and we can try color dodge. I think color dodge might work okay because of what we've already got there. And now you can already see with this effect here that it's bringing in quite a bit of sort of needed interest, if you will. It's really just kind of helping things out. And then we'll want to focus a little bit on getting something right around this primary energy stream. And I don't have any of these layers right here named, and so I usually, when I'm working and I'm doing commission pieces, especially commission pieces, I always layer or name my layers so that I know exactly what's going on here. So with this one, we'll just say arm. Say arm energy, depth of field smoke. We'll say top stream. Let's go through here. I know that that's a smoke brush, but we'll just name depth of field smoke arm. And then this one here will just be mainstream. Just so that we know what's going on here while we're going to be painting a little bit here, and especially when you have unnamed layers, it gets to be really difficult. Alrighty, so grab a new layer, and we can just grab, I think, actually that might work. And we'll just go again with the color dodge. I think for brushes, I don't know, let's see what we can do here. Let's just create some crazy stuff. I have a few brushes that I've been creating lately that I'm not sure that they'll even be good for anything. But this would be good just to kind of play with them and see what they look like. So we'll see where everything else is going. See if maybe I'm not sure if any of these would actually work for what I want. This will actually work perfect. Okay, so what we're wanting to do is just kind of emphasize a bit of this middle piece here, and we'll bring a little bit more color into the brush. And I just really want to emphasize more of like a hot energy. And so what we're doing here is just creating a little bit more of like a particle or an energy stream, you know, that's coming from that on its way up here. And so we can just paint this in. I think what I'll do is create videos here on some of these brushes that I'm creating, that I'll be using for quite a few different things as I progress a little bit more with tutorials. And once I get a little bit more comfortable doing these recordings, I think that it'll be much easier to kind of create some of this stuff for you guys on the fly and not have to worry too much about, you know, maybe what I'm saying or how I'm saying it. And we just start creating things from scratch and really showing you guys a lot of kind of that process that I use. I'm really liking the way that this is actually, you know, adding some energy to the edges of the hammer there. And we'll add a little bit more color to this here in a moment. But right now, the whole point of this kind of brush is just to give, you know, a little bit of like a random, you know, wave effect to certain things, and see if we can get that to pull out a little bit more. This is one of the things that I really dislike about color dodge, is that now we're getting all of these different colors going on. So what we'll do is we'll actually we'll set that to screen, and then we will create a new layer and set that to overlay. So we'll just say stream paint over. And on this new layer, we can just call that we'll just call that overlay pop. So usually when I deal with overlays like this, I typically like to just grab a much lighter, you know, version of the color that I'm working with, and I'll use a soft brush, and we'll try the soft brush first and see if this actually works how I want it to. And then I'll just find certain areas like this that would say be in this blue, and then I'll paint over those. So you can see what's really happening here is that it's really helping kind of enhance some of the effects that might be going around, you know, around the hammer. Overlay is really good at popping and bringing contrast to, you know, the lights and darks that are happening. And so it works really well, especially when you're doing like energy type effects like this, to be able to bring in any bits of color, breakups, and, you know, adding variation to certain things. And so I actually really do like the way that it's also, you know, giving a little bit of like a light effect to things that are happening outside of, you know, the immediate area of the paint. And so I often use overlay just to kind of, you know, add a little bit of a, I guess, sort of a pre-glow to any of the effects that I'm doing. And so what we'll actually do is see if we can get away with this and just create a big version of that up here, and work our way down, you know, down the stream. We'll make that bigger to see if we can place a little bit more emphasis directly on the hammer, kind of that sort. Might be a little bit too big. Take some of those off, and what I'll do is just desaturate this brush just a little bit. Just see if we can, just get a couple hits there and pop these colors out a little bit more. So you can actually use this to really kind of brighten up the sky. What I can do is actually grab the same fog brush or bruise brush that I had created here. Let's go back and find that. Custom brushes. There we go. And so we'll grab this guy, and what we can do is we can actually just paint right on the outside here and see if we can really make some of these, cloud effects or these cloud areas kind of stand out. I think we may need a brush with a little bit bigger details. So I'll see if I even have one that will work for that well. Yeah, this might be okay. So we're just using this brush here to see if we can paint and bring a little bit more of like a funnel. So if I were to actually paint this out here, let's move in Photoshop window. Okay, so we can just grab, we'll say a red brush. And what I'm looking for here is just, as far as the composition goes, is to see if we can create some kind of a funnel that's, essentially working our eyes down, because I'm really not too concerned with having the energy effects coming from the top side of the image. I really think that, even if you have like a cool funnel effect where it's just, bringing the eye down, or you see them and then it brings your eye up. And once we get to putting a little bit more light effects and things like that on them here in a moment, that'll really make everything there stand out quite a bit more. Why did it take so long? Seriously, guys, if you are still here, thank you so much for watching through that. That was a long video, crazy long. Hopefully you learned something and didn't just catch my rambling on all the time. I'm excited for this next video where we finalize this image inside of Photoshop, and then the third video we'll move into grading. Thanks for being here. Like, comment, subscribe. See you in the next one.